Hi, Professor. This is our presentation. My name is Daniel Denazi,
My name is Juliet Maiello.
I'm Ryan Trout.
And my name is Shanna Kaya.
and we decided to do our presentation on John Antioco, who was the CEO of Blockbuster. So my section is the background and the leadership profile of John Antioco and overall just the company of Blockbuster. So Blockbuster was founded in 1985 by David Cook in Dallas, Texas, and they offered a rental of VHSs, DVDs, video games, and then also sold merchandise of the movies that they had in stock. They became industry leaders specifically in the 1990s and really dominated the video rental space. But in the near future, technology kept growing and would eventually become an issue for them. Their business model ran on, coming in and being a member and browsing the store and trying to find videos or any sort of movies that you wanted. You go to the counter and you would pay for them, and you would be given a day that you need to return the video by. And if you don't, then of course you would get a late fee. And that is actually where a lot of the profits came, was from these late fees. So in the early 2000s is kind of where they started to run into a little trouble with some of these other companies. Specifically, it was these DVD mailing companies, and one of them was called Netflix. Don't know if anyone's heard of them, but they were one of the main DVD mail subscribers. Where Blockbuster at this time was really losing the convenience battle, where they were not able to really beat the fact that people never had to leave their house to get these videos sent to them. So that was something they really struggled with. And then in 2007, Netflix would pivot to streaming. And as you can see down here in this graph, 2007, Blockbuster plummeted in revenue and Netflix started going in the right direction. So that was definitely a turning point in both these companies' lifespans. And then finally in 2010, Blockbuster ended up declaring bankruptcy. And in 2014, most of the stores would go into closure. So now moving on to John Antioco. So John Antioco was actually the CEO of a few different companies before he landed the Blockbuster CEO job. So he started at Circle K, was his first CEO gig, and he then moved to Taco Bell, which he served as CEO there, and then finally to Blockbuster. For Blockbuster, he served as the CEO from 1997 to 2007, where he actually, his first few years, he was pretty successful, where he was able to expand their global footprint and overall just kind of maintain their dominance in the video rental space. They were pretty successful before him, but he was able to kind of keep them in the right direction. Um, he actually tried to, in 2004, combat these DVD mail-in subscribing, companies where he tried to create a Blockbuster online, but unfortunately, it was like 4 years behind the other companies, specifically Netflix. And it was too far behind where Netflix had a client base and everything, and it didn't really help at that point. So now going into what type of leader we kind of thought and saw him as, we thought of him as a transactional leader. He really was focused on structure, performance, and just overall like following rules. He was very results and process driven. So like if the money wasn't there, there was an issue. So I have a few separate examples. One example was he made sure to structure a revenue sharing agreement with the studios, as they were paying a ton of money for each VHS, and it would have to be rented out multiple times just to make money back. So he was able to find a way to get it where it was only $1 per VHS, but then they would have to revenue share. And I just thought this is pretty results driven. He wanted to get that money down because it just seeing the company pay that much, he didn't like it. Another thing that I saw is at Circle K, he was known for closing a lot of different underperforming locations, and realistically, he did it because they just weren't making any money. Whereas if he was like a transformational leader, he might have found a way to repurpose these places and find a way to make them, more profitable. And then lastly, when he was in charge, corporate actually controlled the layout of every store. Like they had a baseline look they had to have. And that I think just goes along with the fact that you need to follow these rules, do it this way. They didn't really give much autonomy to any of these separate locations.
So next we're going to be talking about the leadership problem. So in 2000, Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix for $50 million. At that time, Blockbuster was a dominant leader in the home entertainment space. They had over 9,100 stores worldwide, and they were generating about $6 billion in revenue. When, on the other hand, Netflix was more of a small DVD by mail subscription startup, and they were not the streaming giant they are today. So originally, when Netflix pitched the idea to Blockbuster, the CEO, John Antioco, reportedly laughed Netflix out of the room and rejected the deal. And that decision became an extremely famous decision as it was a missed opportunity. Because just 10 years later, in 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy while Netflix continued to grow and then started to dominate the industry. So a question we ask is, what made this decision such a leadership failure? Um, Economist Joseph Schumpeter introduced the concept of creative destruction. Now, creative destruction is where new innovation destroys older industries while creating this new economic value. So, in this case, we have Netflix, who's representing this new innovation, this new creation with a subscription-based digital model. They didn't have late fees, while Blockbuster was the destruction in this scenario. They were an already established company and they failed to evolve with the industry shifts. The entertainment industry was shifting from these physical stores, which Blockbuster had a lot of, to more of this digital convenience since consumers wanted to watch movies, TV shows from the comfort of their own home. And Blockbuster missed out on major industry and innovation waves. So, first of all, they shifted from in-store DVD rentals to DVD mail-in subscriptions. The industry wanted to kind of get rid of that physical factor and move towards online platforms. And then second, the elimination of late fees. Netflix didn't have any late fees. Meanwhile, Blockbuster in 2000 alone made $800 million in revenue from late fees. It was a huge portion of their revenue. So Netflix built their model around this convenience that Blockbuster didn't really have. They didn't have stores, they didn't have due dates, they didn't have these late fees. And instead of adapting to these changing consumer preferences, Blockbuster kind of protected what they already knew they had. They already had these stores, they already had revenue coming in from late fees, so why would they change that? Now, this decision type was a non-program decision, meaning it was unique. John and Tokyo had this unique situation since the dot-com era was a new idea. He was kind of operating under this condition of uncertainty. The dot-com era was new, digital streaming was new. Nothing was fully developed yet, so there was kind of no way to predict how the technology was going to change the market. So it was a high risk choice and it was a hard decision to make as a CEO because why focus on long term? Why think about predictions and you don't have the set information to make that choice? So they kind of focused more on protecting what they know they have. They know they have the revenue, they know they have their stores. So they were protecting short term stability instead of the long term stability. And this is kind of where the prospect theory comes into play because the prospect theory explains that decision makers are more sensitive to the potential losses than they are to the potential gains. So Blockbuster didn't see that $50 million deal with Netflix as an investment in digital growth. They kind of saw it as a threat to their $6 billion in revenue. They weren't going to accept Netflix's new models of no late fees, of being fully online because they would be eliminating a huge source of their revenue, which was the $800 million a year just from late fees. So instead of focusing on this future opportunity, they kind of focused on avoiding immediate losses. And it also connects to the escalation of commitment. John and Tokyo already heavily invested money into 9,100 physical stores, and it kind of makes it psychologically harder to pivot away from that model. Um, but it wasn't just leadership factors that led to the failure of Blockbuster. There were also a lot of organizational structure problems that came into play.
All right, so getting into Blockbuster's organizational structure. Under John Antioco, Blockbuster operated with a highly centralized hierarchical structure. So most major decisions and power was concentrated at the top and then passed down through layers of management. That meant that store managers and employees had very little flexibility when it came to strategic decisions, which is very important that employees and managers are able to interact with consumers and be able to understand consumers like better than people at the top who are just overseeing profits and making sure that things are good without adapting like actual consumer experience. And at the time, this like structure made sense because Blockbuster was highly profitable in the early 2000s and 1990s. Um, they were designed for their physical stores, standardized operations, and they maintained like tight control across like thousands of locations. So, as mentioned, a large portion of their profits came from late fees. Because these penalties were so profitable, the organization became financially dependent on that revenue stream. And naturally, the leadership focused on protecting what was already working. In a stable market, this kind of centralized structure creates efficiency, predictability. It ensures consistency across the organization, but it reduces flexibility, and that became its like ultimate issue towards like bankruptcy. So when competitors like Netflix and Redbox entered the market, this environment began shifting towards convenience, subscription, and eventual digital streaming. Um, Blockbuster structure was not designed at all for rapid adaptation since decision-making power was like fully concentrated at the top. Responding to change required like executive approvals. That slowed down the company's ability to pivot to like more strategic and experimental decisions. At the same time, leadership had like strong incentive to preserve its late fees. That created, hesitation around investing heavily in subscriptions like Netflix did. And, they were worried that it would reduce their profits, but this was more so a short-term plan for them. The organization was just built to maximize its current model and not disrupt it at all. At the same time, the leadership had like strong incentives to preserve these late fees, and they became like complacent. Um, Blockbuster eventually like declined Netflix as well, underestimating how powerful subscription and streaming models would become, and the decision reflected like confidence in their dominance, but it like showed reluctance to move away from a system that had already proven profitable. Um, and eventually, when Blockbuster would remove its late fees, it was more of a reactive move to retain customers, and it did not really transform the company's underlying like structure. They were still centered around like physical stores. They were still operating with a top-heavy decision system, and they were just trying to appease customers that were moving away from Blockbusters and going towards their competition like Netflix. So in other words, they try to change strategy without changing structure. Compared to Netflix, Netflix operated with a more decentralized and flexible structure. Teams were empowered to make decisions, text ideas, and respond like quickly to customer feedback. The communication flowed more freely across the organization instead of protecting an existing like retail system. And also because Netflix was new at the time, so they didn't really have that like legacy structure that Blockbuster had and wanted to try to keep. Netflix like built its model around evolving consumer behavior around the new digital era. They began with DVD by mail, but leadership saw it as part of a larger shift towards, digital distribution, and they were able to pivot and make that change, unlike Blockbuster did. Their structure supported like experimentation, long-term vision rather than like short-term protection. And in contrast, of course, Blockbuster hierarchy reinforced stability over innovation, and it they like their vision was very short term. Um, so as the market like shifted towards streaming and digital access, Netflix structure positioned them to evolve. Blockbuster's structure anchored them to what was made, well, like what once had made them successful. And in a rapidly changing industry, the ability to adapt becomes more important than the ability to control.
Moving on to alternative strategies and solutions, going off of what Shanna spoke about, their organizational structure was very top heavy, concentrating all decision making at the very top, with lower level employees and even management had little to no control. And if they did have ideas, they often got stuck in a long approval chain, and their ideas were a lot of the time never even heard. And if someone in a store or department thought of an idea that could actually benefit Blockbuster, it could take weeks to even months just to reach the top. The company prioritized control and uniformity over experimentation and innovation. Innovation was slowed because the culture rewarded the current model, not testing new ideas. Um, this made it very difficult to respond quickly to the changes occurring in the industry, like Netflix coming into the picture and other competitors. Netflix started as a small and online business, unburdened by their thousands of physical stores like Blockbuster was, and they were free to experiment with new innovative technology and business models like the streaming and subscription services that they are today. And Blockbuster could have adopted a decentralized structure by creating a separate digital division with its own separate budget, and it wouldn't be tied to the revenue stores. It would be a completely different division. And okay. So, sorry. Oh, go back. Yeah. Um, So John Antioco was a transactional leader, and he focused on the process and short-term performance results. While if he was to switch to a transformational leadership type, he would be able to inspire his employees, embrace change instead of resisting it, and focusing on their stores that he invested in instead of moving on to what's going to be big in the future, like Netflix and the streaming services. And if he were to become a transformational leader, he would think more long term and realize that Netflix was the future, and investing in them when it was offered would have been a great opportunity. But because he was a transactional leader, he didn't even think of this long term benefit. He just thought of the short term and how investing would just make them lose money. You can move on to the path goal theory emphasizes that leaders should adapt their style to employees to help employees achieve goals and align rewards with performance, because that's crucial to keeping employees wanting to work and create an environment where employees will want to succeed and help Blockbuster succeed. And in the 1990s, Blockbuster thrived because of its retail dominance, but in the 2000s, that's when Netflix came in the picture and the entertainment industry completely shifted to the digital side of things. And Antioco's directive and controlling style held the company back because it emphasized the processes and rules rather than fostering creativity and encouraging risk taking. And if he applied supportive leadership, it could help reduce the employees' fear of change and help them innovate and take in this changing industry. And if he were to use an achievement oriented leadership style, he could have set specific goals for the employees and targets and rewarded them depending on how they did. And yeah.
So the new vision statement that we came up with is that Blockbuster will become an industry leader in the entertainment space by anticipating industry shifts and embracing constant innovation to shape the future of Blockbuster.
And the new mission statement that we came up with was that Blockbuster's revised mission statement is to deliver innovative and consumer-centered entertainment experiences for audiences by integrating developing technologies such as digital streaming, subscription-based services that adapt to the evolving needs of what the consumer is looking for.
Thank you for listening to the presentation, and here are our sources.